Hello and welcome to another edition of the Osteopathic Lyceum podcast. My voice is struggling a little bit, but that's not necessarily a giant deal because I can talk loud enough and still make a point. So, what I'm going to speak about is the position that I am currently in cognitively with respect to what we've been finding so far with student experiments. So in some ways, the student experiments have provided support and confidence for a previous position, as well as provided the willingness to, say, decrease confidence in a previous position to some degree in specific circumstances, which has large value. So the important point is that there's adjustment of confidence in certain claims based on new evidence or evidence that was collected inside of the environment of the Osteopathic Lyceum. So the general position that I take very, very broadly is that osteopathy does very good work, just not necessarily the work that it says that it does. Or with respect to mechanistic claims, osteopathy is often wrong, even though it is doing something positive that is not directly related to the claim. So if so far you have been following along with some of the results of our student experiments, you'll have seen that very generally speaking, it seems as though treating the base of the skull or the neck does something positive to heart rate and blood pressure, broadly speaking. If we're to apply our findings there to medical ethics, or the first portion of medical ethics being non-maleficence, treating the neck seems to either have no effect on heart rate and blood pressure or a generally positive effect in the direction of lowering both heart rate and blood pressure consistently. The magnitude is not large, but it's consistently either not harmful or goes in the desired direction. Doing CV4 or compression of the fourth ventricle very, very generally does nothing or has a larger magnitude of positive impact on heart rate and blood pressure than treating the neck. However, there were two small circumstances where heart rate and blood pressure went in essentially went up. So they went in the direction that was not intended. So if we look at first do no harm, then treating the neck to target heart rate and blood pressure is more trustworthy because there's no signal of harm in the data that we have so far. As we go on and we look at other areas, so treating the thoracic region so far from what we've gotten as far as results are concerned, doesn't seem to have much of an impact at all on heart rate and blood pressure. Treating the hip seems to have a net average negative outcome on heart rate and blood pressure. So for those who would want to make the claim that the positive impacts of hands-on therapy are non-specific, I can understand where one would be coming from depending on the measures that you're looking at. So say positive patient report. Positive patient report may not necessarily rely on specific interfaces. The positive patient report could be mediated just by how the practitioner interfaces with them. If you're talking about any physiological measure, that seems to be less true. If you're talking about any range of motion measure, that seems to be less true as well, so far as we can tell. Doesn't mean that it's going to stay that way. It just means that with the experiments that we've done so far, that's what we're seeing. With respect to a respiratory value, so inspiratory volume and expiratory volume, so far it seems as though there is a statistically significant positive average outcome of rib springing, even with only 2 springs of the cage, is statistically significant for improving both inspiratory and expiratory volume, with the caveat that it doesn't do it all the time. So again, if we apply medical ethics here and we say first do no harm, the simple question is, are there some people with respect to inspiratory and expiratory volume whereby those directions reduce in volume, or not those directions, those measurements reduce in volume? And the answer is yes. There are some people when you perform rib springing that they will lose inspiratory and expiratory volume post application of rib springing. So if we wanted to target inspiratory and expiratory volume and we applied first do no harm or non-maleficence, we cannot target inspiratory and expiratory volume reliably, despite a statistically significant average positive result or average increase in inspiratory and expiratory volume, we can't get it past non-maleficence. If we can't get it past non-maleficence, then for the purposes of targeting inspiratory and expiratory volume, we can't say that it's good, right? Or we can't say that it is trustworthy to apply for that purpose. There are some people with two rib springs where inspiratory volume and expiratory volume don't change. And there are some people, obviously more people, whereby inspiratory and expiratory volume increase on target measure. So it does have a net average statistically significant positive impact to increase inspiratory volume and expiratory volume. However, if you apply the filter of non-maleficence, you can't get past that bar, which is unfortunate. What would that do then for the osteopathic practitioner? It would give us an early signal that targeting a physiological measure may be something that isn't as easy to do as one would hope based on anatomical presentation or mechanical presentation. So we'll kind of put a pin in that there. If we look at treating the superior thoracic aperture, aka moving the bony ring, so T1, the first rib, and the sternum or the manubrium, trying to move that in order to hypothetically impact the pressure environment whereby blood flows out of the torso towards the brain or towards the head, out of the head towards the torso. Lymphatic fluid will end up in terminal circulation or into the veins, getting back to the heart systemically, or you will alter pressure on the nerves that will pass through that bony ring. The one that everybody would be most interested in would be the vagus nerve. Okay, so insofar as its impact on respiratory values, so we want to change the pressure environment with respect to the first rib and T1 and the sternum. If you look at respiratory values or volumes, it doesn't do anything reliably whatsoever. For some people, it gets worse. For some people, it gets a tiny bit better. And for some people, it does nothing. So the STA cannot be claimed as a net positive or that it does no harm to inspiratory volume and expiratory volume. So again, we can't get past non-maleficence when targeting a physiological value. If we look back to heart rate and blood pressure and treating the hip, if I was trying to treat the hip because I thought that for some reason the mechanical restriction to the hip was having, say, some impact on the saphenous vein as it enters into the internal iliac vein, or say the femoral artery as it feeds the leg as it exits. So if the hip is doing something mechanically, then I could start to think that maybe there's going to be some blood flow issues, and I should see that in heart rate and blood pressure. I should also, if I decided to maybe see a change in circumference of the leg, if I measured that as a proxy for altering pressure gradients, which would then alter in some duration, swelling within the leg or fluid volume within the leg. So we could add that as a measure. So far, it seems like it has a net negative impact on heart rate and blood pressure. So as a systemic thing, if I have a net negative average impact on heart rate and blood pressure, I should actually suspect that treating the hip having a net systemic negative impact on heart rate and blood pressure, maybe it would actually not, in some time frame, help the circulation to the leg. We do have evidence from other people's research that passive limb mobilization, or say passive joint mobilization, will alter blood flow dynamics for a very short period of time. So I think it's something in the range of 1 minute to 2 minutes of passive pumping will change blood flow in the local area for, well under a minute. I think it's 15 to 30 seconds or thereabouts. I'm not quoting it accurately, and I fully admit that. So if you want to go look that up, feel free. And there could be information that I haven't come across that might make me look ignorant, because at least with respect to that information, I would be ignorant because I don't know it. So with respect to heart rate and blood pressure, systemic circulation type things, we can at least start to think that, sure, there will be times where if you work on the hip itself that it could go in the positive direction, it could do nothing, and it can go in the negative direction. And more often than not, in a very mild way, it goes in the negative direction. So I can't say that treating anywhere has a net positive impact on heart rate and blood pressure as measured in a relatively systemic fashion. So I can't say that. I can't get it past non-maleficence, right? The thing that I want to try to use all this information to describe is that when you are targeting a physiological measure, there is more variability than one would like based on anatomical or mechanical presentation. So just because something doesn't move as well as one would like, or compared to the paired structure in the patient's body, just because there's a mechanical obstruction does not mean there's a physiological change in a positive or negative direction. So changing the mechanical side does not necessarily reliably, and with reliability meaning a consistent range of results, as well as discriminating, the ability to discriminate between something that is and something that is not, right? So if I was to measure it, this is either better or it is not better. And we can do that when we test things. We cannot reliably say that treating generally, targeting heart rate and blood pressure, regardless of where I go, has a positive outcome. We can say, and this is the update to my position, that at least if I wanted to target heart rate and blood pressure and have a net positive impact on it, by being able to help that measurement go in the direction desired, which is heart rate and blood pressure dropping, even only mildly, I trust the neck the most. I trust CV4 at a reasonable level, but everything else I can't trust because I can't get past non-maleficence. So there are some measures where if we target them, specifically heart rate and blood pressure so far, we can have the desired directed outcome, even if the magnitude isn't large. However, essentially everything else, we can't get past non-maleficence because if I target, say, inspiratory and expiratory volume, it goes up, it goes down, it does nothing with the experiments performed so far. It's possible that this could change over time depending on the specific measurement, the specific thing, the location. It's possible for this to change. But so far what it's doing is the information that we're getting back and the observation, the results, is further giving me confidence that if you target a physiological measure, it's not going to consistently do what one would want. However, it does so far with what we've been able to see seem to give me more confidence that if you stay on altering the motion that you identify as restricted and you speak to that we can get some relatively positive results without generating harm if we use the barrier concept. This then relates very well to the quote ascribed to Dr. Still, but not necessarily written by him: find it, fix it, leave it alone, nature will kindly take care of the rest. So if the mechanical obstruction you find is properly related to the specific physiological process or the internal sensation that the patient reports to you, if they're properly related, when you change that mechanical obstruction in a net positive direction, then the internal sensation reported by the patient or the physiological measure will change in the desired direction. But it's if. Okay, so Dr. Still, if you care about history, gave you that out. Find it, fix it, leave it alone. Nature will kindly take care of the rest. If this mechanical obstruction is the problem that is related, or if this mechanical obstruction is related to the problem that we're trying to solve, that is not the mechanical problem, then they'll change together. Excuse me. If the mechanical problem that I find is not properly related to the other problem reported that we're trying to solve for, I will get the movement better and the measure will not change. The subjective report won't change, the internal sensation won't change, the internal process won't change. We're seeing that borne out in our data so far. So far, if you treat the area that's restricted, we seem to see an improvement in range of motion. So far, there is a rate at which other areas of restriction will be improved by treating a distant area, but it's not all the time, right? It's often, or often enough that it might have value. It's not all the time. So far, with some chart review that I've done internally, not necessarily published, but when I look at the charts that are being written out or recorded for student treatments, so when students are treating others, and like essentially clinical treatments, so far what I can see is that when you treat only the primary, especially if you have the opportunity to go long lever, you seem to be able to treat the secondary and tertiary mechanical restrictions. If I keep you on short lever only, the rate drops. That's what I can see so far. So it's a really superficial pattern. But what I would predict is that because you can use a larger structure, which has more things going on when you use long leverage, it has more opportunity to have diffuse effect because there's just more stuff going on that you're not controlling for, which is okay. When you go short lever only, say you treat the restricted shoulder, short lever only, it's about 30% of the time that the restricted hip changes, and vice versa. Treat restricted hip, short lever only, 30% of the time restricted shoulder changes. When you treat the restricted shoulder or the restricted hip, short lever only, it's 50-ish% of the time the back changes, whatever you found in the back. So we've got relationships there. But what I would say is that so far, superficial chart review suggests to me that when people are allowed to use long lever, you're more likely to have a positive impact on your secondary finding and your tertiary finding with respect to mechanical restriction. So this all seems to be giving me more confidence in positions than I held before, but I have to make sure that I note the caveat that with respect to heart rate and blood pressure specifically, I trust treating the neck to have a net positive outcome or no harmful outcome, whereas CV4, there's a little bit of signal that the heart rate and blood pressure may go the wrong direction, but it will, with greater magnitude, go in the right direction. So we've got something there that I have to make sure that I note as an update to my model based on data observed. So overall, it seems like increasing my confidence in the claim that I make that osteopathy does very good work. The stories are crazy, and the work that osteopathy does that's good is not necessarily the work that it's saying it's doing, because the mechanistic claims have problems. So hopefully walking you through that has done something. I appreciate your time and attention. Hopefully you learned something. We'll talk again soon.